Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 13. This week, we're going to talk about diffusion of innovations theory. This is a theory that's been around. It's had various streams that have fed into it over the years, but in our discipline, a scholar by the name of Everett Rogers developed it largely in the 1980s. It's been a really influential theory adopted by health communication researchers, media scholars, many people in different areas of communication research. So this theory is not too difficult to understand. It really looks at how products, media, new innovation or new technologies, and even ideas and new practices go out into society in different ways. So it kind of looks at how they're adopted by different segments of society. And so one of the things that we know is that it takes time for new ideas and new practices and new technologies to spread across society. And so there's different groups that adopt them first and some adopt them later. And so if you look at the diffusion model, the first group is what is known as the innovators. So these are really people who kind of come up with the ideas, see its value right away. So I remember in the 1970s with the advent of personal computers, I knew some people who worked in Silicon Valley because that's where I grew up. And so as a matter of fact, I worked at a record store and Steve Wozniak from Apple Computers actually came in and bought a bunch of records. I got to meet him early on, but he was somebody who was instrumental with Apple Computers beginnings. And so when I think of innovators, these were people who kind of came up with the ideas of the personal computer, all the uses that it could have. And then you have what are known as the opinion leaders. These are the people who are next to adopt the technology. So these are the people who say, hey, this is a really great idea. We can use this for business. We could use it for all types of things to help us out. And I remember, I would say I was probably in the early majority because my family was very interested in getting a computer as early as I think late 1979, 1980. And at that time, you had to go to a store and actually almost build a personal computer. So I remember there was a place called Heathkit Electronics in California. So you could go and kind of put together what you would think of as a personal computer. And so it was very cumbersome, not like the computers that we have today. Then I remember, not too long after that, we saw kind of that early majority of the first wave of people buying personal computers. So Apple really took off. My first Apple computer was an Apple SE. It had a monochrome monitor. I think it had 1 megabyte of memory in it. So there was barely anything compared to what we have today. But I found it useful because I learned to write papers in a typing class on an old typewriter, and I hated typewriters. So to me, just having a word processing program was amazing to be able to use, even as early as when I was in high school. Of course, in those days, we had dot matrix printers, and it just wasn't the quality that we see today. But, as soon as that first big wave of people adopted computers, then you had what's known as the late majority. So they're kind of the next big wave to adopt a product, media, or ideas, practices. And then finally, you have the laggards, who are kind of the last to adopt. And there's a lot of reasons why people are laggards. Sometimes it might be older adults who have retired from the workplace and maybe they're not introduced to new technologies that younger people are using. A lot of time, too, it has to do with levels of education, certainly income, socioeconomic status. So people who are poor are not able to buy products at least right away. And so one of the great things about new technologies and media is it starts out expensive, but as more and more people adopt them, you see the costs go down. And so you can get a flat screen TV now for next to nothing if you go to Best Buy, assuming it opens again. I remember when flat screen TVs first came out, how expensive they were. So you can think of any technology as going through this diffusion process. And so now, we've seen it with smartphones, we've seen it with mobile apps. A lot of the media we use has already gone through this process. And even with newer technologies that we're seeing, different types of apps and programs that we can use, we're seeing people in different stages. With COVID-19, I was surprised to learn that a lot of our faculty at George Mason had never used Blackboard before or taught an online class. And so there was a huge learning curve. We essentially had a lot of late majority and laggards when it came to using instructional technology who had to quickly learn those skills. And so I guess that's one good thing about COVID-19. George Mason University is now more prepared to have online classes. All right, some other things I wanted to talk about. A lot of people, when they teach us here, will talk about what I just mentioned, the whole diffusion process of going through innovators down to laggards. But sometimes what I think is even more interesting are some of the other components, like relative advantage. So if it's a new idea or practice, does it have an advantage over older practices? Or if it's a new technology or product, does it supersede the benefits of the older technology? So certainly having a smartphone is better than, the older forms of cell phones that we had. When I was a kid, if I wanted to have a private conversation with somebody, a friend or girlfriend, I would have to, we had this old phone that I had to pull into another room in order to talk to people, just so my parents couldn't overhear it. So now with texting and SMS, kids have an advantage. Of course, my son, who's almost 6 now, my older son, he knows how to navigate smartphones in a way that that's probably much better than I can do. And so, but it's certainly for him, it's had a lot of advantages that he can access schoolwork now due to COVID-19. All of his kindergarten lessons have become distance learning. All right, so certainly new technologies are adopted faster if they have some type of relative advantage. Compatibility. Is it compatible with people's existing skills or way of doing things? If it's a completely new idea for somebody and they have to learn an entire new set of skills, then it's going to take them longer to adopt that technology or idea. Then you have complexity. How hard is it to learn how to use the new technology? And people, I think, are surprised me sometimes how quickly they can learn things if they have to, just like the distance learning at George Mason. Then tryability, is there a chance to kind of try it out for a while before making that decision to purchase something? I had my iPhone go out right before everything shut down. And so I was a little bit mad that, I had to spend $800 for a new phone. And so I can imagine it's a big commitment for people to take on a new technology or buy it sometimes. But it's worth it often, if it has that relative advantage, et cetera. And then observability. Does the technology or idea bring results? So let's go to the COVID-19 example that I am using this week for our discussion. So I have a picture of the seafood market in Washington, D.C. And this was just a couple of weekends ago. You saw huge crowds of people in the midst of this pandemic, not social distancing. And so this idea of social distancing has spread throughout the country as COVID-19 has gotten worse. And some people have adopted it right away. Other people have not. So I have not been within probably 15 feet of anybody outside my immediate family since like March the 7th. So I'm trying to take it seriously, but I have neighbors that are standing this close apart from one another, lots of them congregating together. So some people are not adopting this idea. And throughout the country, you see that there are reports in the news of people not social distancing. So it's an idea that has taken a while for some people to adopt. In terms of results, though, or observability, I think we're already starting to see some of the results of social distancing. So Virginia, for instance, they said the peak for coronavirus cases and deaths would be in late May. Now they've revised it and said it's going to be late April. And so I think we are seeing a flattening of the curve. Doesn't mean it's not going to come back. We're not really sure what's going to happen this fall. But, I think it is, there's some evidence out there that this idea is making a difference, which is a good thing. And so some places it's easier to social distance than others. We're a little bit better off in Virginia than people in DC and New York City or living on top of one another in apartments and so forth. And so, it'll be interesting to see how this idea really works. But I like the fact that if a technology or a new idea is a good one, you usually see some type of results. All right, I'm going to leave it there for this week. Anyway, I hope that everybody is doing well and staying well. Hope that your families are safe as well. Hang in there. It seems like things are heading toward that peak, and maybe we'll see the downward slope soon of the coronavirus. So I really hope that all of you stay safe and sane in the midst of this pandemic. Until next time, have a great week.